just back to this appalling management of coronavirus, it's clear that politicians making these decisions and bureaucrats have never had anything to do with business. Every week things change. Workers and their families and businesses are being smashed. In New South Wales, we looked like we were getting back on our feet, and the same for Queensland. Then in come the politicians. New South Wales has 3 people in intensive care, 14 in hospital. Our friends in WA, Tasmania, South Australia and the ACT, none. Queensland, 4 in hospital. Let's bring in Michael McLaren, whom you love. Before we get to that, Michael, water. There's water everywhere. Where does this bloke Flannery stand, who was the Australian of the Year?
Well, I would say condemned. But of course, you see, this is the problem, Alan, I think, is this issue of modelling. Now, look, by all means, let's model all sorts of things, be it coronavirus, be it water drought, climate change, whatever. There's a huge amount of money in modelling, clearly. But governments seem to treat modelling now as the 11th commandment. Now, I think you've got to be far more sceptical about these models that are presented. They're not gospel truths. They're only as good as the numbers you put in. And there's that old acronym GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. So if the numbers you put in are garbage, what you get out the other side is going to be equally ridiculous.
Flannery said in 2007 that the dams would be entirely dry and, quote, where does Sydney go for more water? He then told us that global warming was drying up the rain. Hello? And so they made him Australian of the Year for this. And Sydney would face, quote, extreme difficulties with water. Listen to this rubbish. Brisbane will never have dam-filling rains again. The water problem is so severe for Adelaide that they might run out of water by early 2009. Here's another. The soil is warmer because of global warming, and the plants are under more stress and therefore using more moisture. So even the rain that falls is not going to fill our dams and our river systems. And yet here we have, I think I've got a little bit of an illustration here of the state of our dams. If you look at them, they're Warragamba Dam. These are our dam levels. Can you read that there? Warragamba Dam is at 89.6, Warranora Dam 76.7, Avon Dam 92.1. There they are, all there, 100%, 95%, 98, 96, 100, 92.9. I mean, this bloke was made Australian of the Year. See, this is this stuff we've got, you're right about. We've got it with coronavirus now, this alarmism. We've got it with climate change. We've got it with water. And the public out there don't know who to believe, but you can only believe the statistics. There they are there.
Well, look, sometimes the modelling's right, but sometimes it's wrong. And modelling, of course, always gives you a range of scenarios. And it seems that often the political class go for the extreme and say, well, that's going to be it. Let's policy that.
The most alarmist.
But, of course, that's very rarely the case.
Well, let's come to this business about a national cabinet. Yeah. Now, most people out there would think, well, a national cabinet will come to national decisions in the national interest. So Scott Morrison says, OK, we don't close borders, they close the borders. Scott Morrison says, we don't take kids away from school, they close the schools. And it's a quarantine, looking after the most vulnerable, looking after the elderly, looking after the aged care. It's completely failed. How much longer do we have to suffer this national cabinet?
Well, forever, it seems. I don't think there's going to be a change. I mean, this is the evolving beast that was COAG, which was something else prior to that. But the problem I have with it, and many even in Labor have a problem with it this way, is the lack of democracy, the lack of direct accountability that seems to be coming from this model. It's quasi-dictatorial, but more than that, they seem to make a decision around the Skype screens, but then the premiers go back to their respective jurisdictions. They do something completely different. So everyone's confused.
178 out of the 210 Victorians to die were in aged care. 178. 17%, I mean, forget the percentages, New South Wales, 29 of the 50 dead were in aged care. Now, Scott Morrison said on March 15, we must look after the vulnerable. Well, the National Cabinet hasn't looked after the vulnerable. Who's to blame?
Well, there was an enormous amount of work put into returning hotel travellers. The same amount of work clearly, and I think this started to come out in the Commission yesterday, clearly was not put into aged care. And yet, as you've said all along, the elderly, those with pre-existing conditions, will be the most susceptible to the virus. So why wasn't the bulk of the effort focused on them instead of people coming back from England or whatever on a holiday who might be 30 years old?
Well, that's precisely what Morrison said on the 15th of March, and they seem to have departed from all of that.
Yeah. Well, and again, if National Cabinet's the answer to all our problems, it clearly isn't working. Something's got to be rejigged around this, and I've spoken to Professor David Flint extensively about it, who knows the Constitution back to front. He's made the point, it's that lack of accountability, that lack of direct democracy that seems to be the problem with the National Cabinet. It's too dictatorial, and the public just aren't getting the information,
correct,
as is often the case with Cabinet and confidence decisions.
Michael, I've asked Andrew Constance to join us, and he is in our Sydney studios. There is suffering beyond the coronavirus, and he is in the middle of it in his electorate in the New South Wales South Coast. This is terrible stuff. Last week he expressed legitimate frustration that a new fire season is upon us, and he simply says his own government, the New South Wales government, has not done enough to protect New South Wales from another devastating firestorm. Now, this is a very good man, this fellow, with a big and kind heart, but all of this has taken its toll on him and everybody, because on top of the bushfires, now the people at Moruya, ravished by bushfires, were told at the weekend, gather your pets, gather your clothes, gather your medicines and your insurance, and evacuate. Now, Moruya is 305 kilometres south of Sydney, 175 k's from Canberra. There have been evacuation warnings for East Nowra, North Nowra. These all suffered from bushfires. Sewerage lines, can you imagine what that means? Sewerage are the pipes. They break, the stuff inside, everywhere. Yards, sheds, buildings. There was flash flooding south of Wollongong. Andrew has said basically to people on all sides, he's been involved with this. People whose houses, think about this, who were destroyed originally, now living in makeshift tents, and they've gone. 300 millimetres of rain, that's 12 inches has fallen. A bloke died in Canberra. He went missing while kayaking on the Murrumbidgee River. Erin and Jim Humphreys, cop this. They lost everything in the bushfires, the Bega Valley. They've been living in a caravan on their 10-hectare farm. The rains caused chaos. Their home's a mess. They said, we've had enough. A fire and 2 floods. No heating. They're in their 70s. And they're saying what Andrew Constance says. There's always some reason why something can't be done. Andrew Constance, I hate talking to you. We talk about this all the time, the time. You've been to hell and back, but away you go. How bad is it tonight?
Well, Huey sent it down. It's come down in buckets. But, look, most people are pretty resilient. They're happy to see the drought over. We were still in intense drought 3 weeks ago. But, you know, local roads have been affected. People will be cut off for a few days. But, you know, they're good Australian souls, salt of the earth people. And the thing that worries me most is that you've got a lot of people who, west of the highway, are still in caravans and they've just copped an absolute pizzling with the rain. And they're doing it fairly tough. They want to rebuild. And the comments I made last week were about rebuilding and about helping people get back on their feet. I
know. I mean, you're saying give landowners the power to clear fire fuel off their properties without facing fines. Now, the community, you made the point, are not interested in arguments between green and brown, but the Crown lands and council reserves have no communities, no firefighting capability. What are you saying? You're talking about this 50-50 rule. Just explain that. It's common sense.
Yeah, look, first of all, I've got to acknowledge certainly the work that Gladys put in place in terms of the process. I don't want to disrespect the process because out of respect to the fireys and everyone who's participated in the Commission inquiry, it's only fair to them. But there's some common sense things that got to happen. First of all, you know, people having to go and do ecology reports on parts of their block where there used to be garden beds, that type of stuff is just really grating people, having to fork out thousands of dollars to get an ecologist on site. That's after they've lost everything. You know, the reality is these firestorms did a lot of damage. They changed the biodiversity. They changed the flora and the fauna. And as people rebuild, we've got to make sure that they can get the space between them and the vegetation to facilitate the building so it doesn't happen at enormous cost. Now, I'm the first to put my hand up and say we've got to listen to the RFS and listen to what they're saying in terms of the nature of the building products. And you've seen my place, you know, you can see how it survived because it had the space. So push the vegetation back a bit, particularly the areas which have been burnt out.
But just to interrupt you there, you're simply asking for the landowner to have the right to clear vegetation within 50 metres of his house. Now, is that going to be allowed or not?
Yeah, so look, hopefully as we get through this next couple of weeks, there is this being looked at, and I want to recognise my ministerial colleagues for doing that because they, since last week, they've been quite responsive in terms of some of these issues and just grappling with them because, you know, if you can push the vegetation back, well, you give everything a chance.
Absolutely.
If, you know, we do see bushfires. So the other point that I would make, you touched on Crown lands before. I mean, we all seem to zero in on national parks and hazard reduction, but we don't zero in on hazard reduction in Crown lands and council reserves within communities. And what I've known in the past is, you know, on a Sunday morning, you might get someone out with a lawnmower running across some Crown land somewhere or someone raking it up or cleaning it up and giving the fireys a bit of a chance when we see these events, because they're going to come again. And the other problem we do have, certainly in terms of what's happened with this event, is the bush is going to recover at the same rate over such a large area. So,
right.
you know, in 5, 10, 15 years' time when we, you know, see drought again, you know, it is going to burn at an extraordinary
we've got to
level
do...
again.
Well, you're saying we've got to do something now, Andrew, and we must do something.
Yeah.
Look, we've got to go. We could talk to you all night about this. Hang in there. I know you seem to be a one-man band from time to time, but you've got a lot of support, and our thoughts are with all those
support.
All those people down there. Good on you. Just a final word from you, Michael. I mean, this is appalling, isn't it? Regulations everywhere killing these people. What's your take on this?
Well, I mean, people outside of the city would know more about this than people in the city, I guess. But, you know, you've got situations where clearly councils or governments give people permission to live somewhere. You can't just go and set up. You've got to have all the paperwork. But then having granted that permission, often then people are not then given the next obvious step, which is the ability to protect
yourself.
Their environment. So there's something's gone horribly wrong here. Yes. But also it's the cost of all of this paperwork. I mean, even if you just want to build a house or renovate a house in the city, by the time you've had the noise thing done and the light thing done, people don't have the money.
But if the bureaucracies say that tree shouldn't have been knocked down, fine $3,000. Now, I'd say to all those people down there that are listening to me, I'm not in favour of breaking rules, but listen, if you think the land has got to be cleared 50 metres away from the house, clear the bloody land and let us then fight the battle with government as to whether they're going to lock you up or fine you $3,000. Good to talk to you, my friend. You do a wonderful job. There he is, real talent, Michael McLaren.